Tonight on PBS News Weekend, President Biden dismisses concerns over his age and performance as calls grow for him to drop out of the presidential race.
Look, I mean, if the Lord Almighty came down and said, Joe, get out of the race, I'd get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
Then Iran elects its first reformist candidate in 2 decades, what his victory means for the Islamic Republic's future. And former astronaut Katie Coleman on overcoming obstacles during more than 2 decades with NASA.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Desjardins. John Yang is away. President Biden is facing more calls for him to jump out of the 2024 race following a disappointing debate performance last week. Today, moderate Democratic Congresswoman Angie Craig publicly declared that Biden should step aside as the party's nominee, citing the debate and his words since, saying she does not believe he can win against Donald Trump. PBS News has spoken with major Democratic donors and members of Congress today who are privately signaling the same call. This despite Biden sitting down yesterday for a television interview to address those concerns. The president told ABC's George Stephanopoulos he thinks he can win and does not plan on dropping out. Domenico Montanaro is NPR's senior political editor and correspondent, and Kadia Goba, a political reporter for Semafor, and my good colleagues who know politics so well. I want to first talk about who I've talked to today. 2 members of Congress and a major donor today who praised Biden to me, but said, sadly, time for Plan B. This even after Biden went to such lengths to try and explain what happened at the debate.
Kanye was having a bad night when I realized that even when I was answering a question, even though they turned his mic off, he was still shouting. And I let it distract me. I'm not blaming it on that. But I realized that I just wasn't in control.
Kadia, I know it drives voters crazy when we use these anonymous sources, but this is a very delicate moment. The White House is trying to reassure Democrats, but what's your reporting on how much the momentum may be moving the other way?
Yeah, Lisa, it is delicate. I think the problem that Biden is facing is that members of Congress who were considering or contemplating whether or not they would ask him to step down from running weren't convinced after that last interview. When I spoke to some of my sources, they said they weren't surprised that Angie Craig came out, and they expect the floodgates to open once members of Congress return next week. So I think we'll hear more members come out and say the same thing.
I think it does depend on what they do hear from their constituents. But to be honest with you, it's been a week of this, right? And Joe Biden is in control of his own destiny. If he wants to run, he's going to run. Now, he did say, we heard that clip where he said, you know, if the Lord Almighty came down and told me, Joe, you shouldn't run, then I won't run. But the others who are a bit more in control of this process also, it appears, are the Democratic leaders in Congress that Joe Biden trusts. People like Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, Minority Leader, Jim Clyburn, who really all but helped Joe Biden win the South Carolina primary and propelled him to the 2020 nomination. But all of them so far are supportive of Joe Biden. If they're not going to push to have him out, then he's not going to get out of this race. And at a certain point, it'll feel like overkill, and the Democratic Party is going to have to figure out how they're going to kind of coalesce back together to be able to beat Donald Trump.
Well, my report, and you guys may be hearing also, is we know that Democrats have called a call together tomorrow night, House Democrats, for some of their ranking members, their leadership. And whatever we're hearing publicly, it is different privately. One thing I want to get to is a key question. It's not just about Biden's ability right now, but what will his ability be like 2 years, 3 years from now? And here's how Stephanopoulos brought that up.
Do you have the mental and physical capacity to do it for another 4 years?
I believe so. I wouldn't be running if I didn't think I did. I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do. You know, not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world.
But he's not agreeing to submit to some kind of specific cognitive test. Domenico, you wrote that a key factor here about Biden, it can go either way depending if you support or not him, is that he's stubborn.
Now, clearly, I mean, look, Joe Biden has had obstacles throughout his life, right? And he's had lots of naysayers. People tell him that he's not supposed to run. People telling him that, he's not the best candidate, to defer to others. And this happened in 2015 when former President Obama basically got him to step aside to allow Hillary Clinton to run. And they look at that, the Biden folks, and say, look, you were wrong then, you're wrong now, because they feel the Biden name can still win. It's a difficult thing. This is a conversation, frankly, though, that the Democratic Party should have probably had 2 years ago, as opposed to 4 months until Election Day.
I hear that so much. We've been talking about lawmakers, but Khadija, you've got some reporting about donors. And I also hear donors not just hesitant, but moving away. How significant is the donor message to the Biden campaign right now?
I would say it's pretty imperiled. Donors look at this a little more black and white than lawmakers, right? They're not thinking about constituents. They're thinking this is an investment that I made to a candidate who I thought would be the best Democratic candidate and who would probably win against Donald Trump. That is not happening with polling, with the botched report or the botched debate, and just recently this interview. What I thought was more stunning on the phone call is people.
This is a phone call. You were on a phone call with Biden donors and the Biden campaign.
And what I thought was stunning was, well, more advocates for political strategists, was donors ready to move on at this point. It wasn't a matter of humming and hawing. It was just, hey, he is not going to win. How do we convince the Biden campaign that we need someone else at the top of the ticket? And to me, that was incredible, this close to an election, to hear that from big donors.
There were strong words on that call. I talked to one of the donors that was on that call that said they actually were sort of offended because the advocates were saying, we don't really think you have a just cause here. And also other Democrats say the White House just isn't listening. But Domenico, can the White House turn this around now? It's really gone quite far.
Well, there's clearly a huge antipathy for Donald Trump in this country. I mean, let's remember, there's probably more than half the country that does not want Donald Trump to be president. We've seen repeatedly Donald Trump's unfavorable ratings above 50%. He didn't get above 47% in either of the last two elections. And if you were a betting person, you'd say he's not going to get above 47% this time either. There are third parties. It's probably even going to be lower than 47%. So certainly there is the appetite to not have Trump as president, and we're spending all this time talking about Biden, but clearly there are things that Donald Trump
But that's what's driving this too. There's a fear from Democrats that they can't beat Trump.
Absolutely, because they want to win, right? But when we talk about it in the media and like some of the stuff that came out of that debate, when you look just on paper at what Donald Trump has said and done, it really spells out the difference between the Democratic and Republican parties for why we're seeing this kind of cry out for Joe Biden potentially to step aside, because we're not talking about Joe Biden's conduct or character. We're talking about his age, as opposed to Donald Trump, where people have real serious problems with some of his conduct and character.
His capability, at least. In our last few seconds, Khadija, is this week make or break? As you said, Congress comes back on Monday.
Yeah, I don't know if anything will change Joe Biden's mind, but I do think a flurry of Democrats will come out asking to step down, even if it's for the benefit of their own constituents and something they need to prove in those swing districts that, Trump won.
Surprised Joe Biden didn't do more to promote Kamala Harris, by the way, in that interview.
It's a topic I think we're going to get back to at some point. So Domenico Montanaro and Khadija Go, but thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Iran has a new president-elect after a runoff between a reformist candidate and a well-known hardliner. The reform-minded Masoud Pezeshkian won by nearly 10 percentage points in an election that saw record low turnout during the first round of voting. Although his win has brought hope to some Iranians, others remain skeptical of the president-elect's ability to change underlying problems.
Our life is getting worse every day. It is true that salaries increase a bit, but at the same time, living expenses have increased.
Among his promises, Pezeshkian vowed to reach out to the West and ease restrictions on the country's headscarf mandate for women. We'll discuss what the election means for Iran's future later in the program. In northern Ukraine, Russian drone attacks hit a vital energy facility overnight, cutting off thousands of homes from power and water. Crews are working to repair the damage and restore power, according to Ukrainian officials. The drone attacks are part of Russia's strategy to target key infrastructure. Some new hope for a possible ceasefire in Gaza. The Associated Press reports that Hamas has initially signed off on a U.S.-backed ceasefire and has dropped its demand that Israel pledge to end the war. That's been a key sticking point in negotiations. The announcement comes as the Gaza Health Ministry announced an airstrike killed 16 people and wounded dozens more at a refugee camp. Israel says it found terrorists in the area and tried to avoid civilians. After a springtime lull, coronavirus cases in the U.S. are ticking up. New data from the Centers for Disease Control show COVID is on the rise, especially in the West. Nationwide, there's been a 23% jump in ER visits. The CDC says it is able to predict spikes in cases due to wastewater testing. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, a look at Iran's future as they elect their next president, and former astronaut Katie Coleman on the joys and challenges of life in space.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Reformist Masoud Pezeshkian will ascend to the Iranian presidency in a delicate moment for the Islamic Republic, both on the world stage and within its borders. He faces a government still largely controlled by hardline clerics, tension with the West over Iran's nuclear program, and domestic frustrations with the regime. Ali Rogan has more.
To discuss what this means for Iran, the U.S., and other stakeholders, I'm joined by Suzanne Maloney. She's the Vice President and Director of the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Suzanne, thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit more about Masoud Pezeshkian. What did he campaign on?
Masoud Pezeshkian is a 70-year-old longtime member of the parliament who served also as the health minister during the second administration of President Mohammad Khatami, who was Iran's first reformist president. He has kept a relatively low profile up until this campaign. He did register in previous rounds of Iranian elections back in 2013, and then again in 2021 when he was in fact prohibited from running by the Guardians Council, which vets all the candidates. This time around, it was a little bit of a surprise that he made it through, in part because he wasn't terribly well known. But of course, all of the elements about this election were very improvisational because it came in the wake of the unexpected death of the prior president, Ibrahim Raisi.
And Pezeshkian had fashioned himself a reformer. What sort of campaign did he run? What kind of message was he putting out there?
Well, Pezeshkian is a longtime member of the Reformist Party that has largely fallen out of favor due to the fact that President Khatami, its standard bearer, and others were really unable to effect meaningful change for the Iranian people. And yet it has remained a part of the Iranian political system. And Pezeshkian, when he was selected to run, entitled his campaign Baraya Iran, or for Iran. It was really meant, I think, to talk about the theme of Pezeshkian's campaign, one of being pro-Iran, very much non-disruptive, very much in favor of the current clerical-led system, but one in which he wanted to see Iran more engaged with the world and less confrontational and hostile to the world.
Iranian officials have long pointed to relatively high turnout levels in Iranian elections as a sign of legitimacy behind the regime. But this time around, there were two rounds of voting, and both of them had relatively low turnout numbers compared to previous years. What does this year's turnout say about the feelings among the Iranian voting public?
I think it's been clear for many years that much of the population is incredibly disenchanted with the Islamic Republic and the clerical theocratic regime that runs Iran, but they haven't really had a way to demonstrate that dissatisfaction. The fact that only 40% turned out in the first round of this election was really a startling number. In past elections, it's run as high as 70 and 80% of the voting population that has in fact voted, in part because there are requirements for individuals to vote. And so that so many risked that requirement to stay at home was a real concern for the regime, and I think it was part of the reason why the election went to a runoff, and in fact why the clerical establishment is quite happy to have someone like Pezeshkian in this position now.
Where does this deep frustration with Iran's ruling class come from, and how might the presidency of Pezeshkian impact that?
Well, Iran has an incredibly young population. Most of the population has been born not just since the revolution, but since the end of the Iran-Iraq War in 1988. And they have seen varied attempts to try to normalize the regime, varied efforts to try to promote some liberalization of both politics and society, as well as some expansion of Iran's ties with the world. But none have really succeeded, in part because of the very hardline stance of Iran's ultimate authority, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And so they've become very disgruntled, very much disillusioned with even the modest efforts of the system to try to give them some kind of political participation. They've also been very dissatisfied with the state of the economy, which has been subject to both very heavy American sanctions, but also to considerable mismanagement by the clerical system. It's really unclear that Pezeshkian's presidency will make a meaningful difference. He is someone who's quite loyal to the system itself, but he will bring about a kinder, a gentler Islamic Republic to some extent, and that at a time of considerable tensions on the regional scene and considerable dissatisfaction at home might just be a benefit for both the population and for the leadership.
There is, of course, the Iranian nuclear program, which is the source of so much tension between Iran and the West, and of course, rising tensions with Israel that we've seen play out since the October 7th attack. How do you think this election may affect Iran's approach to all of those issues?
I expect that Pezeshkian's election will have very little impact on Iran's foreign or regional policies. He will have limited bandwidth or engagement with the nuclear file. The same is true for Iran's relationships with its proxies across the region. It is possible, though, that Pezeshkian can inject a note of caution, a note of prudence, which seems to have been both his style and his message on the campaign trail.
Suzanne Maloney with the Brookings Institution, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Fewer than 300 human beings have visited the International Space Station. Even fewer than that have spent more than 150 days living there. And as NASA plans to deorbit the space station in 2030, the chance to see Earth from the ISS cupola is getting slimmer. John Yang recently spoke with one of those few astronauts about the joys and challenges of life in space.
Katie Coleman is one of only about 670 people on Earth who've spent time not on Earth. She's a former NASA astronaut, a veteran of 2 space shuttle missions, and of a 6-month mission on the International Space Station. She writes about all of this and how she succeeded in a system not designed with women in mind in a new book, Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. Katie Coleman, thanks so much for being with us today. A select group have been in space, but even a more select group who spent 6 months in space in a zero-G environment. What's that like?
I loved it. People feel bad for us. They're like, oh, 6 months, that must have been awful. And I literally didn't want to come home. There's a lot of work and stressful, but the fact that, like, we think about floating up there, but it's about flying. Like, if you want to go somewhere, you just give yourself a little tiny push and you will fly across the whole station. So it's a whole new way of life. And I like what my colleague Don Pettit said. He said, if I could bring my family with me, there's just no reason to come home.
Many astronauts like to be tethered to the wall in their sleeping bag in their sleeping chamber. Not you. You wanted to float free as you slept. Talk about that.
I think you experience zero gravity during the day, and you're working and you're going and you're doing, but we get to live there. It's there all the time, and I just wanted to have it be part of sleeping too. Now, I'm not floating around the whole space station. We each have a cabin, and often I would kind of wake up, upside down, or you kind of wonder where I am, where you are, but I literally would wake up just thinking, wow, I'm still here.
Did spending time in space change your view or vision of life on Earth or and our relationship with Earth?
Well, I'm somebody that's always thought that if we could just connect with each other a little bit better, or a little bit more people together, we'd be better off. We'd have more solutions and handle situations better. And yet, seeing the Earth from 250 miles above, I still felt at home. And I looked down and I just was like, oh, if only people could realize that we're all from the same place. And I think that when we go to Mars, you know, nobody's going to be having bumper stickers that say their country, that it's all going to be E for Earth.
You write about it in the book, about spending so much time away from your family. Talk a little bit about that.
It is really hard. It's hard. We made a big decision that I would go on this space station mission, which meant a couple of years of training around the world, as well as that 6 months up on the space station. It is a long time to be away. There is this element of that it's dangerous. And I think the going up, the launching, and the coming home are the times that you just can't ignore that. But actually, up in space, I think that, you know, they just felt like mom was working someplace else.
Being in a system that wasn't designed for women, the spacesuits, for instance, not designed for women, some of the workspaces not designed for people with shorter arms. Talk a little bit about how you navigated that. Everybody's
going to do it differently. And, you know, you can come up with a situation where they're sort of like, you know, I don't know if we need people like you here. And you can say, but, you know, you picked me. Or you can be on the end of, which is really where I kind of tend to work, which is how can I explain to these people who don't see that I belong here, not because they don't like me, but because they just don't have that vision yet. There was a time in the mid-90s when they decided for the space station, which would start in the 2000s, they would not have the smaller spacesuits. And if you could not qualify in that spacesuit, for us, in a medium spacesuit, which is actually quite large for us, then you could not live and work on the space station. I did qualify in the medium, but if I hadn't, I would actually still be waiting since 2010 when I launched to be able to go. And there's so many implications, you know, in terms of management and experience and being somebody who's, you know, can really go out there and bring what they want to the mission. And I think that because it's a physical thing, it helps people understand that sometimes there are less tangible things where you walk in a room and people are surprised to see you, or they're surprised by your lifestyle or by the way you communicate. And in those situations, there's lots of people that can see people who aren't quite seen and also relate well to management and bring them together and literally introduce them. Hey, you want Katie as a Capcom because she talks.
Among your many other achievements, you play the flute, and you had what I believe is probably the first and maybe only extraterrestrial flute duet with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, no less. How did that come about?
So a friend of mine is a DJ in Houston, Dana Steele, and I'm like, Dana, you must know how to get hold of Jethro Tull. And so she got hold of him, wrote him a nice letter, and I was able to bring his flute up to space, and we couldn't figure out what to do until I looked at our calendars. And on April 11th of 2011, Ian Anderson was playing a concert in Russia, in the city of Perm, and I was living on the International Space Station. And it's a special day because that is the 50th anniversary of human spaceflight. The first person to leave the planet. It's not about a certain country, it's about a person left our planet. And so for us to do a duet between Earth and space seemed quite appropriate and very scary for me.
The challenges you faced in the astronaut corps aren't limited to the astronaut corps. There are a lot of people going through the same things in their careers. Who were you hoping would be motivated by this book, would read this book and say, oh, this is how I can do this?
I think this book will appeal to people who know they have something inside of them that the world needs. And you can't always be the most confident about that. I mean, I am not. But this book is designed so they can read that some of these things happened to me in the space program. And if it could happen in the space program, it can happen anywhere. And it does. And just realize that, you know, you're in a group, you're part of a group, get that group to help you. And it may not seem fair, but you have to speak up about who you are and what you bring.
A lot of the lessons you learned were big. They talk about how to leverage insecurity into performance. Some of them were small. Talk about wiggling your toes so you don't tense up. What are the biggest lessons that you learned and want to impart?
The biggest, most important lessons I think for all of us, are the teamwork ones. because there's stories about, the magic of space, of all the things, the possibilities that we have, but we're not going to have those possibilities on this planet if we don't solve some of our challenges. And sports coaches like to say that it's all about the team and not the individual, and that's true in terms of the bigger mission, but the individual and what they bring is really paramount. But just as paramount is that you on the team either understand what people bring or realize when they can't bring it themselves and you need to help them.
Katie Coleman, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our program for tonight. I'm Lisa Desjardins. For all of my colleagues, thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket. Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing. Have a nice day.
and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.